This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. China and Nicaragua restore diplomatic relations after Managua cuts ties with Taiwan. Beijing criticizes the U.S. proposal for an internet alliance as an attempt to maintain hegemony. And more than 50 people killed and dozens injured in Mexico trailer crash. Well, China's Taiwan Affairs Office has welcomed the decision of Nicaragua to break diplomatic ties with Taiwan. It has urged the remaining countries that still have diplomatic ties with the Taiwan region to make the right decision. The remarks come after China and Nicaragua issued a joint communique announcing a resumption of diplomatic relations. Lu Xirui reports.
The Chinese and Nicaraguan government delegations have held talks in Tianjin today, and during the same meeting, they have also signed the joint communique on the resumption of diplomatic relations between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of Nicaragua. And the two governments announced they will re-establish diplomatic relations. In fact, back in the 1990s, China has severed those relations when Nicaragua recognized with the Taiwan region. On Thursday, Nicaraguan government announced it was breaking diplomatic relations with Taiwan and ceasing any contact or official relationship. Managua declared it recognized that in the world there is only one single China, and it says the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government that represents all of China, and Taiwan is inalienable part of the Chinese territory. And China says Nicaragua's decision represents the general trend of development. China is also willing to develop friendly relations with Nicaragua on the basis of 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. That's on the basis of the principle of mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality, mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has welcomed Nicaragua's decision in a meeting with the country's top diplomat.
我们双方共同确认了刚刚签署的中尼联合公报当中的所有的内容。
Both sides have confirmed the content of the China-Nicaragua joint communique that was just signed. China welcomes Nicaragua's decision to cut ties with Taiwan region and resume diplomatic ties with the People's Republic of China. Nicaragua has become 181st country to have diplomatic relations with China. Taiwan is part of China, and the government of the People's Republic of China is the only legal government representing the whole country, including Taiwan. This is a clear fact. The establishment or restoration of diplomatic relations with China is an irresistible trend in today's world.
China has strongly condemned the Alliance for the Future of the Internet, a proposal by the United States at Washington's Summit for Democracy. The alliance reportedly aims to establish an open and reliable internet order based on American standards. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson says the U.S. is trying to impose its own standards on others. He says it will no doubt place restrictions on and deprive developing countries.
The so-called Alliance for the Future of the Internet, promoted by the U.S., is another example of it trying to split the Internet, seeking technological monopoly and cyber hegemony, and suppressing technological development in other countries. The United States attempts to impose its own standards on other countries. It is trying to restrict and deprive others, especially developing countries, of their right to choose partners in developing the Internet. It is also trying to prevent countries from enjoying the dividends of digital economic development and technological progress.
Summit for Democracy. 55 world leaders were on the call immediately, virtually, with President Biden. This two-day event got underway. Over 100 nations participating, but a lot of people saying, should the US be participating? Let's face it, we're coming up on the year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, where about half the country still believes that Joe Biden, the president, stole the election, and there's gerrymandering across the United States, from Wisconsin to Texas, in terms of pushing democracy aside in terms of partisanship. Well, Joe Biden says that the US is approaching this from a feeling of humility, and that the US can learn as well. Let's take a listen.
Democracy needs champions. And I wanted to host this summit because here in the United States, we know as well as anyone that renewing our democracy and strengthening our democratic institutions requires constant effort. American democracy is an ongoing struggle to live up to our highest ideals and to heal our divisions, to recommit ourselves to the founding idea of our nation.
But of course, the US has chosen who is a democracy and who isn't with the guest list, although they insist that is not the case. Off the list was Turkey, for example, Hungary, and on the list were Taiwan, most controversially, and Brazil perhaps as well. India was included despite criticism. What is concrete? Well, the US is providing a lot of money, actually, about $500 million for election integrity, to try and make sure that democracies are transparent, fighting corruption, and also sharing best practices. Now, of course, there has been criticism, especially from Russia and China, who see this as essentially as a wedge issue. The US is trying to divide between what it sees as Western democracies and more authoritarian forms of government. Now, what's going to come out of all this? Well, remember, this was a campaign pledge by Joe Biden just as the election was underway, and all the problems with that followed, and he wanted to have a democracy summit. It's the sort of thing he could pledge before being president. But this whole idea of bringing democracies together basically follows almost a climate change format. They're going to follow up every year, share best practices, and of course, even though nothing is binding, the US wants to center itself as a democracy, while obviously having huge problems of its own back home. The question goes forward, is this a coalition of the willing? Is this another ad hoc alliance to further alienate countries like China or Russia, or is it something more serious? One thing that is serious is that this country isn't always delivering from its people, unlike other non-Western forms of democracy, and that's very interesting indeed. Nathan King, CGTN, just outside the White House.
Well, at least 53 people have been killed and dozens more injured after a trailer crashed in southern Mexico. Local officials say most of them were migrants from Central America. Frank Contreras has more from Mexico City.
The details are now just starting to come in on this tragic highway incident that took place in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. Civil protection authorities in the state of Chiapas, speaking to witnesses, are told that the truck was carrying more than 100 people aboard, a tractor trailer. It was traveling at excessive speed. Witnesses say it hit a sharp curb, and in that moment, the driver lost control tragically. The vehicle flipped over and smashed into a pedestrian bridge in the area there, and also into a concrete structure. And of course, that was disastrous. Bodies were strewn all about the highway. Eyewitnesses have reported that bodies are now being shown on social media, covered up in white cloth, lying on the roadway there. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador is lamenting this tragic situation, sending condolences to the families. This tragedy comes just a day after the United States to use again this new system called Remain in Mexico. It's a migrant protection protocol, so-called program under the Trump administration, whereby migrants are now required to remain in Mexico. We're told that at least 58 people have been sent to hospital, some of them in very grave condition. So that means the possibility of the death toll rising here in Mexico in this deadly incident.
Well, the UK is tightening COVID restrictions as it faces a surge in Omicron cases there. Nearly 250 new Omicron cases were identified in the country on Thursday, almost doubling Wednesday's daily total. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has confirmed that England is moving to what it calls Plan B measures. The new restrictions have drawn criticism about the timing of these measures. Guy Henderson reports from London.
The British government is moving to what it calls Plan B COVID restrictions for dealing with the spread of the Omicron variant through the winter months. in England. That means a return to work from home guidance from Monday. It means that face masks will become mandatory in more indoor settings. And it also, for the first time in England, means the introduction of COVID immunity passes, something that is seen as particularly offensive to the libertarian instincts of many members of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's Conservative Party. But there is a broader swathe of criticism at the timing and swiftness of these measures coming towards the Prime Minister as well, particularly from the business community. Executives in the hospitality sector saying already that they will require more government support because of the potential loss of business due to these new restrictions. Those are the kinds of schemes that the government had wound down in recent months. Up until a few days ago, the British government's view was that it wanted to wait until a fuller picture emerged about the exact threat posed by Omicron. The fact that it has now apparently U-turned and brought in these restrictions at quite short notice appears to have blindsided even some senior ministers and has led to widespread criticism. There are some even within the Conservative Party who are also questioning the credibility of the messaging coming from the British government now amid headlines about allegations of parties held inside number 10 Downing Street during the last lockdown. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. CGTN's Angela Coppola in Johannesburg and Naba Muhyiddin in Khartoum are standing by to bring you some of the top stories making headlines across Africa. Coming up next on Africa Live. Please stay with us.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Africa reports positive signs in hospital data amid Omicron wave. The WHO warns against vaccine hoarding as poorer countries struggle to get vaccines. And Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed returns to the capital Addis Ababa from the battlefront. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, South Africa's economy contracts by 1.5% in the third quarter as recovery suffers setbacks. And in sports, South Africa's Kaizer Chiefs failed to honor fixtures due to rising COVID-19 cases. Well, Africa Live begins in South Africa, where the Omicron coronavirus variant is driving a fourth wave of COVID-19 infections there. The country's health minister says early hospitalization data shows the variant appears to cause mainly mild infections. He was referring to data released by the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. According to the institute, early data shows 31% of cases are severe. This is compared to 66% of severe cases recorded in the early stages of the second wave of the pandemic in South Africa. The NICD, however, warned that the study has its limitations and severe cases could rise. Well, CGTN's Angela Coppola joins us live from Johannesburg, South Africa now. Hi there, Angela. Hospital data from South Africa showing that severe cases are lower than in past waves of COVID-19. What more can you tell us about these findings, Angelo?
Well, Hannah, that data is pointing to lower levels of severity, especially when you compare them to the Beta and the Delta variants. Although it's still early days, the experts are saying that they need at least 3 weeks worth of data to confirm their observations. You'll know that it's just over 2 weeks since the world heard about the new variant from our South African scientists. But we have seen a jump in infections in Gauteng again, which is the overnight epicenter. Weekly cases, in fact, have jumped 400% since the last week, but hospital admissions, interestingly enough, are only up 200%, which points, I'm told, to lower severity rates. Hospital admissions are also suggesting that the people that are being admitted are there for surgical procedures and then get tested and found to be positive, and that they're also asymptomatic. Initially, we did see a higher proportion of young adults and children being admitted in this fourth wave, but that has since moved. And fewer youngsters and more old people are testing positive. So while infections are up, hospital admissions are down or low, and I'm told that this suggests that the severity levels are also down. Hannah?
Well, Angela, speak to us about this Ministry of Health the officials who had held a briefing earlier on today. What was discussed at that press conference?
Well, the briefing really focused on Omicron, and also the Health Minister, Joe Putler, was saying that the variant is now the dominant variant, with 70% of infections that have been sequenced now identified as the new variant. It's also what's driving the Gauteng province's infection rates. Transmissibility, we understand from the Minister, is also up, with one person now infecting 2.5 people. And according to Putler, that's the highest reproductive rate of all the variants so far. We also heard that the PCR tests and the rapid antigen tests are still effective in identifying the new variant, with the Department of Health more worried about vaccination numbers. Those are down from a high of around 290,000 per day to just 130,000 per day, with many of the young adults aged between 12 and 32 not being vaccinated just yet. But he did say that 27 million doses had already been administered, and that equates to around 43% of the adults covered. Putler, of course, once again reiterated that the country could still have, as he put it, a successful festive season, provided more people get vaccinated. And we still don't have any news on whether we're going to hear a presidential address anytime soon, Hannah.
Thank you so much for all that. Angela Coppola speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, as countries grapple with a new COVID-19 variant, Omicron, African countries are working to vaccinate their populations. The World Health Organization estimates that only about 8% of the continent's population is fully vaccinated. More than 80% of Africans are yet to receive a single dose. CGTN's Wilkes Anyawa has that report.
The African continent has now registered more than 8.8 million cases of COVID-19, with over 220,000 deaths. Now, with the emergence of a new variant, researchers are working to determine whether the Omicron variant is more contagious, causes severe illness, or if it has any impact on vaccines and treatments. So far, at least 10 African countries have reported cases of the new variant. Africa is now racing to ramp up the pace of vaccinations. The continent has so far received more than 372 million COVID-19 vaccine doses and administered 248 million doses, about 67%. To date, only about 7.8% of Africa's population is fully vaccinated.
Only 6 countries in Africa, out of the 54 countries, have reached the global target of vaccinating 40% of their population by the end of this year. Millions of people in our region are without protection against COVID-19. So this is simply dangerous and untenable.
50 African countries have used at least 50% of the doses of vaccines received. 2 have used less than half of the doses received.
We have issued ourselves, with Africa CDC as well, a strong statement going into that direction, recognizing the the generosity of countries that are donating vaccine to some of our member states, but also stating quite firmly that it's very important that this donation come with enough shelf life so that country can plan and deploy this vaccine without any problem.
More than 70 countries have imposed travel bans that are mainly targeting southern African countries, some of which have yet to report any Omicron case.
What is really important is to review these measures which has been imposed and to take the most appropriate measures, knowing that this might also have a major consequence, because this can really discourage many countries for sharing additional information on these kind of public health, global public health threats.
In South Africa, a regional genomic sequencing laboratory is supporting 14 southern African countries. Wilkes Anyawa, CGTN.
The WHO has warned wealthy countries against hoarding COVID-19 vaccines as booster shots. WHO Director General says that the hoarding is denying poorer nations access to those vaccines. CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma reports.
It is 1 year since the global COVID-19 vaccination campaign was rolled out. Today, the WHO puts at 40% the world population that is fully vaccinated. But in Africa, the World Health Body puts that figure at just 3%. Wealthy nations have been accused of hoarding vaccines and threatening supplies to poorer countries where inoculation is low.
We all believed and hoped that a year later we would be nearing the end of the pandemic. Instead, the death toll has more than tripled, and the world remains in its grip. Despite our best efforts in the years since the start of the global vaccination campaign, low and lower middle-income countries have been left behind.
As if that is not enough, the world is now dealing with a perilous situation, according to the WHO Director General.
The recent emergence of the Omicron highlights our perilous situation. The development of new therapeutics could make a substantial difference in preventing severe COVID-19. But we must not allow the same inequitable access to these new tools that has deprived millions of people of vaccines.
We have a fitter, faster, but not invincible new variant for which we don't fully understand the implications clinically or the implications for our vaccines. But it is not invincible. And what we do in the coming days and weeks, both in terms of virus suppression, vaccination and equity, will make a huge difference to the evolution of this pandemic in 2022.
WHO says Omicron was first detected in Southern Africa and Hong Kong. But early hospital data from South Africa shows less than a third of patients admitted during the latest wave linked to Omicron were suffering severe illness. This compared to 2/3 in the early stages of the last two waves. The WHO Director General is, however, disappointed by the travel bans imposed on some African countries.
Transparency should be rewarded, not penalized. And we're also concerned that other countries may be discouraged to be transparent, actually, for the future. It has an impact. So we're very, very concerned.
Concerns echoed by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa.
We should be concerned that some decisions are no longer informed by science and are not taken on the basis of exercising solidarity. This pandemic has shown how we respond to a truly global crisis. It has shown several shortcomings and weaknesses. But we can and must improve how we respond to crises. The lives and livelihood of billions of people are at stake here.
A war to end the pandemic that is hoped will create a win-win situation for all. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Well, Burkina Faso and Niger, in a joint statement, say that their combined armies have killed 100 Islamist militants in 2 weeks of operations. However, there is no independent confirmation of this claim. The statement was issued a day after Burkina Faso's President Roch Kabore sacked his prime minister in the wake of angry protests. The demonstrators have been protesting against increasing casualties caused by jihadist attacks that have killed thousands and displaced over 1 million people. At least 14 members of a civilian militia fighting the jihadists in Burkina Faso were killed in the north of the country on Thursday. Officials say over 250 of its members have been killed since the volunteer force was created 3 years ago. Dozens of soldiers and police have also been killed over the past year. Well, we're staying with that story, and to give us more analysis on it is Fahiraman Rodriguez-Kone, a senior researcher at the Sahel team at the Institute for Security Studies based in Bamako, Mali. Thank you so much for joining us, Fahiraman. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have been plagued by jihadist attacks in recent times. What seems to be some of the deeply rooted issues that we don't normally talk about on platforms like this?
Yes, indeed, the last 3 months have shown a strong offensive of extremist group in the 3 countries, but particularly on the 3 borders area, but also towards the West African coastal, like countries like Benin and Togo and Cote d'Ivoire. But I think this trend is based on the historical trend we are seeing in the region. The extremist group, based on the control of the already acquired areas in previous year, are increasing their logistical and financial capacities. This allows them to easily conquer new areas and gain solid local adhesion, facing to state security response which are not proactive and also undermined by under-equipped armies and demotivated soldiers. So the current situation is really a trend which is linked to the historic situation of the region.
Fahiraman, I've heard some people, some analysts, some observers, and even some people from that region saying that this is a hugely economic issue, and that if you deal with the economies in these countries, it could improve the situation. What is your view on that? And also, what is your view on the security strategy right now and why it might not be working?
Yes, the economic factor is a key point, is a very key point because of that violence extremist groups are trying to control traffic, illicit, controlling, for example, gold mines economies in the context of endemic poverty, in the context of lesser response of the state, and this is really a big problem. And I I can say that the solutions now is very important that the state, if the military solution is not the ultimate solution to take, but it's important that state reinforce the army. We must see a more engagement of state in this area, but also a strong engagement of regional bodies like ECOWAS and also AU. We have seen that there is international troops we are decreasing, so it means that there should be a more engagement from national and regional authorities.
Fahirman, thank you so much for all that. Fahirman Rodriguez Konya, senior researcher at the Sahel Team Institute of Security Studies, which is based in Bamako, Mali. Well, violence continues to erupt in Sudan's Darfur region. Dozens of people have been killed this week in 3 separate areas of the region, according to local medics. The UNHCR says that nearly 10,000 people have fled intercommunal fighting in West Darfur's Jebel Moon locality. Over 2,000 of them, mostly women and children, have sought refuge in Chad, which hosts more than 500,000 refugees. Sudan, on the other hand, has more than 3 million internally displaced people, more than 85% of them living in the 5 Darfur states. Well, CGTN's Naba Muhyiddin is in Khartoum and joins us for more on that story in Darfur. Naba, hi there. Aid groups warning of a rise in violence in Darfur, where dozens have been killed. What is the latest?
The latest is the number of death toll is rising, and it reached over 180 since the violence erupted on November the 17th. And also the number of internally displaced people is rising, and it reached 15,500 due to the UN recent report. People are still stuck in governmental buildings and mosques and around the hospitals and schools, and they cannot reach the hospitals. Most of the people are losing their life because they can't access the hospitals, and also doctors are reporting a lack of medical equipment and the poor conditions of the hospital. Among UN issuing reports all the time and closely monitoring the situation, and also the government also sent a lot of forces and troops to boost the security around the villages and around the conflict area.
Naba, can you speak to us about what the reasons are that have triggered this latest eruption in violence, and just how the government and international organizations are dealing with the situation?
International organizations are calling for urgent intervention, are reporting the situation, and the government also is reacting to it, and there is decisions to make security procedures and to form a joint cabinet and joint forces, including military security and other uniformed forces, with a joint cabinet located in Al-Fashir, with authority to seize the weapon and to collect the weapon and to punish the perpetrators, and to make special courts for the rebels and everyone is involved in the conflict. The situation in Darfur right now is alerting with a very big humanitarian crisis if it's not contained, if it's serious steps are not taken by organizations and by the government, and may extend to other regions around Darfur area.
Thank you so much for all that. Naba Muhyiddin speaking to us from Khartoum, Sudan. Well, let's not take a short break. More in Africa Live when we return, including Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed returns to capital Addis Ababa from the battlefront. And a UN mission to launch joint security operation with federal forces in the DR Congo. And welcome back to Africa Live. Well, the UN says thousands of people have been uprooted from the town of Shewa Rubit. The town is situated in both the Amhara and Afar regions. It added that thousands more have also been displaced from Lalibela. The United Nations says they've been displaced by the ongoing fighting.
I have rather a lengthy update for you from on the situation, humanitarian situation in Ethiopia. In the north, our colleagues are telling us that many people continue to be displaced due to the conflict in Amhara, Afar, and Western Tigray. A recent assessment in the towns of Desi and Kombolcha saw the looting of public services, including health facilities, and as noted yesterday, significant looting of food supplies from Kombolcha was also reported. We are continuing to scale up, our partners are continuing to scale up their assistance to the parts of Amhara and Afar that they can actually access. In Amhara, more than 947,000 people receive food aid since the start of November, including more than 370,000 people in the past week. Our partners have resumed their support to 3 hospitals and 19 health centers in Amhara. In addition, 26 mobile health and nutrition teams operating in the region. And in Afar, in the past week, 16,000 people received food assistance. More than 26,000 displaced people receive water and sanitation support, while 30 health and nutrition teams are operating in the region.
Well, for more details on that situation, CGTN's Giram Jala joins us live from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Hi there, Giram. The UN saying that many people continue to be displaced due to conflict in Ethiopia's Amhara and Afar, as well as the Western Tigray. What is the latest situation from those regions?
Hannah, since the Prime Minister returned to Addis, we've tried to get the picture of what's happening in the north. As you know, most of the formerly captured areas of the Amhara regional state towns like Dese, Kombolcha, and also Bati towns up north are now freed, and life is returning to normalcy. The government has replaced administration. It has formed ways of bringing people back to their localities, those people who have been evicted because of the ongoing war for a few months. But now war seems to be being pushed to the north, bordering the Amhara regional state and the Tigray regional state. The government is aiming to control, retake the town of Voldia. This is a militarily strategic location as well, and the last perhaps stronghold of the TPLF force. As we've said earlier, in the north, Lalibela city and others also are freed. The humanitarian situation still remains to be dire, although war seems to be subsiding and heading up north, and areas freed by the Ethiopian National Defense Force are trying to return to normalcy at the same time. The United Nations complained time and again. The government has also confirmed that TPLF force have looted most of their houses. Food aid, which was supposed to be delivered for people, have been taken away. So the situation at the moment when it comes to war seems to be happening in the Amhara regional state, northern part of it. So the Afar and Tigray regional state relatively do not really see active combat at the moment.
Giram, you've spoken about this humanitarian situation, and also it's been a concern globally regarding what's happening in this region. What is the status of aid delivery, particularly to those places that you say that are struggling to get that aid delivered to them? And how is the government helping in getting that aid to people who need it most?
So the government has its own organization which is delivering food aid, and that in collaboration with the United Nations has been delivering food for 3 of the regions, the Afar, Amhara and the Tigray regional state, of course. But to answer your question, one of the biggest hiccup perhaps is the number of trucks which have entered the Tigray regional state did not really return. The government has reported that hundreds of trucks which crossed from the Afar regional state to Tigray carrying food aid did not return, and those which entered perhaps a week or so back, they didn't even come back, according to the government. The UN Ethiopia office has confirmed that these trucks still remain in the Tigray regional state, and they said that we need trucks, according to them, we need trucks to deliver food aid. So one of the most important problems which need to be resolved as soon as possible is way of delivering this food aid, that is truckers. The other one is the looting. As you know, if a supply is dwindled from the source, say for instance in warehouses because it's very difficult for UN or other organizations to deliver for the needy. So that's one thing that needs to be resolved as soon as possible. But the other one, and the other most important one, is the ongoing conflict. Although it's happening in the northern part of the Amhara regional state, insecurity still affects food delivery. And from the Tigray regional state as well, the insecurity can be seen here and there, and the government does not have confidence to send more trucks across the border towns. So this and other general problems, the government is also calling on the international community to continue supporting aid efforts in this country. So these problems, if not solved as soon as possible, Hannah, they might lead into another catastrophe, this time around humanitarian one, not the war, as the war is subsiding all in all.
Thank you so much for bringing us all those details, Giram Chala, speaking to us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Well, we're staying in Ethiopia, and the Prime Minister there, Abiy Ahmed, has returned to the capital 3 weeks after leading government troops at the battlefront against TPLF rebels. Since his move to spearhead the fight, federal troops have recaptured several areas that were previously under the control of TPLF rebels. That's according to the government. CGTN's Giram Chala brings us that report.
After almost 15 days on the battlefield leading the Ethiopian armed force in the fighting, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is now back in office, resuming his official duties in Addis Ababa. The Prime Minister in a statement said the first phase of work to defeat the rebel force has been successfully completed, with the Ethiopian National Defense Force having retaken control of several towns in the Afar and Amhara regions. People in the capital Addis Ababa have called the PM's intervention at the war front a game changer.
We are happy that, first of all, the Prime Minister has entered alongside the National Defense Forces and won the war. I would personally like to thank and congratulate the Prime Minister. To be honest with you, the people at large, those who are on the battlefields, have gained untold courage following his leadership in the front lines.
Throughout our history, all of our leaders have had the same historic achievements of leading the army at the front lines. When a leader is at the forefront, those who follow, including the soldiers, fight with a lot of morale. By the way, His Excellency went to the front for a few weeks, but that has changed months of problems. It has brought basic changes too.
TPLF force still claim that the towns they lost, such as Dese, Kobolcha, Bati and others, have been left by their force in a strategic withdrawal and not because of the push by the Ethiopian force. Analysts, however, say TPLF fighters suffered one of their biggest defeats since the war began more than a year ago. People here say that they will continue supporting the leadership in the capital.
From now on, we stand with the Prime Minister concerning any Ethiopian issue. He is our true leader. We gave him our vote following the recent elections. We have faith he can take Ethiopia further and make it better.
At the moment, all of the Afar regional state are free of TPLF fighters following heavy battles which led to the recapture of all of the border towns. Still, few areas which belong to the Amhara region remain in the hands of TPLF. Government source told us the work of retaking several locations held by the rebel force, including the strategically significant Waldia town, will be completed in just a few days' time. Giram Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The DRC and UN peacekeepers have signed an agreement to launch a joint operation in the country's east. Over 100 militias operate in the troubled region. This agreement with the UN comes as Uganda and the DRC are carrying out joint operations against the ADF rebel group. Asatal has more.
The accord between the DRC and MONUSCO will focus on tackling armed groups. The UN mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo is the organization's largest, with an annual budget of over $1 billion. The agreement would see UN forces move from an observer role to a combat one. The DRC is also partnered with Uganda in an effort to fight the allied democratic forces. The ADF has been linked to ISIL. While the group is based in the DRC, it began launching attacks in Uganda, including a twin suicide bombing in the capital Kampala.
The armed forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda People's Defense Force troops, are conducting operations on the ground as we have infantry on the ground, moving towards the targets that we shelled last time.
We started with the artillery and Air Force to destroy a number of ADF camps. Now we are preparing now to carry out an offensive on the same enemy camps, wherever they will be.
Neither the UPDF or DRC's armed forces have released a timeline of how long the joint operation will last. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, as Tanzania celebrates its 60th year of independence, its president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, has called for more unity, peace, and the pursuit of economic growth. She was joined by other African leaders at the Uhuru Stadium in Dar es Salaam to celebrate the anniversary. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
A reminder of the freedom fighters who fought for independence from British rule. President Samia highlighted what Tanzania has achieved as an independent nation in the past 60 years.
Moja ni kufanikiwa kuulinda uhuru au uhuru wetu na mipaka yake.
Firstly, we have been able to protect our freedoms and our borders. We have also been able to protect the peace and unity that we enjoy now. And we have grown our economy and reduced poverty, something that allowed us to move from a poor country to a lower, middle-sized economy.
Za uchumi wa kati wa chini.
Tanzanians say they have every reason to be proud of their nation.
I think we are doing good. We have taken steps. You can't compare it to the past. For instance, the transport sector, the information sector, sports. Basically, we have made strides.
I am really happy that we have reached 60 years of independence. We have peace and happiness. We are free. We can go anywhere. There are no bombs, so we are thankful.
Despite the progress, the president says more needs to be done.
Wito wangu kwenu ni kuendelea kudumisha amani.
My call to you is to preserve peace and unity and our union, to continue with no hesitation, to grow our economy, and make economic reforms that allow us to cope with changes happening across the globe.
The ceremony was attended by dignitaries from across Africa. Among them, Presidents Paul Kagame from Rwanda, Filipe Nyusi from Mozambique, Azali Osuman from Comoros, and DRC Congo's Prime Minister, Sama Lukonde. Tanzania's head of state says over the last 60 years, the country has transformed itself in various spheres of life, namely economy, politics, and social services. It's hoped that now the country can continue to grow beyond its low middle income ranking. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Well, South Africa's economic recovery stalled in the third quarter. GDP data released this week showed that the economy contracted by 1.5% in Q3. The country was slowly recovering after the COVID-19 lockdowns of 2020, but then suffered a setback after civil unrest in two key provinces. Sumitra Naidu reports.
While the latest GDP figures are disappointing, it wasn't a complete surprise. The looting and damage to property at the end of July cost the economy $3.4 billion. Hundreds of businesses were destroyed in two of South Africa's main provinces, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng.
The minute the riots took place, it had an economic impact. We saw it on the spending of consumers. We saw that shock in the system. All of a sudden, car sales were down, retail sales were down, manufacturing was down, electricity sales were down. Everything was very, very negative. And many of the indicators didn't improve in August and September as much as it should have done.
KwaZulu-Natal is home to the largest port in sub-Saharan Africa. The Durban port is also the busiest terminal in the region, handling over 34 million tons of cargo a year. Farming is another major industry in the province, which is why agriculture declined so sharply. Agriculture dropped to a 16-year low, down 13.6%.
Agriculture is quite seasonal, so there should be a pickup, particularly during the current fourth quarter due to the planting season for the summer crops. Manufacturing also was down, and also retail sales. Those two are not surprising because they were the ones which were impacted by the July riots.
6 out of the 10 sectors in the economy showed declines in activity. Trade, manufacturing and agriculture suffered the steepest falls.
Mining declined, which is unusual, I guess. But where we saw the other two big declines was what we call the trade sector, which was wholesale and retail trade. And that had a 5.5% decline. If you think about it, the warehousing and the retail places that were burnt to the ground meant that trade in that quarter was going to be negative. The manufacturing facilities that closed only opened, some of them in middle of August. Manufacturing declined 4.2%.
With COVID still present and a new variant causing an increase in infections, there are concerns real growth in South Africa will take longer than expected.
Power supply challenges are also hampering industries from operating effectively. The growth forecast for this year has now been dropped to between 3 and 3.8%. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The day's sports update after this short break, including South Africa's Kaizer Chiefs failed to honor fixtures due to rising COVID-19 cases.
How would you create your legend? On the fields,